What you're gonna need today is one of your pieces of drawing paper. You're gonna need a straight edge. You can use what I provided. You can use a ruler, anything that has a straight edge to it so that your pencil can follow along the side. And you're gonna need your letters that you had just practiced in your sketchbook. So the word that you're gonna draw out, I was thinking you could do your first name, you could do your last name, but what you're gonna need is 6 to 10 letters. And so my last name works. If your first name works, great. Your last name works, great. Maybe they're too short. You could write your name and maybe the first couple letters of your last name, or you could, abbreviate something if it's too long. Use your middle name. Really, any word that is 6 to 10 letters long will work. So if your name just is not working for you, pick something that you're interested in, your favorite band, sport, something that is 6 to 10 letters long. Okay, so to get started, what I'm going to try to do is draw a line right through the middle, a horizontal line. And so I'm just kind of eyeballing it again. I'm not going to do a lot of crazy measurements. I'm trying to get this line in the middle, not the middle of this in the middle, because then it'll be a little high. So you're looking at this top line, trying to kind of get it in the middle. And then I'm going to hold it with one hand, and with my other hand very lightly, because you want this to eventually be erased. I'm going to hold it back here by my eraser so I draw lightly. I'm going to draw my horizon line. Okay. Then on the very edges of this piece of paper, I'm going to draw my 2 points. Okay. Because we're drawing that word in 2-point perspective. Now again, I'm going to try to eyeball where the middle of this is. I'm thinking about right here. I'm going to try my best to keep this as vertical as possible, keeping parallel with the edges of my paper. Again, I'm drawing a very, very light line. So I've got a cross section here. I'm going to draw 2 more points, but this time I'm not putting them on the very edge like I did here. I'm going to come down about maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches, and I'm going to put a dot here. Same thing down here, not all the way at the end. I'm going to come up like 1.5 inches or 2 inches roughly and put a dot here. Okay, so we've got our points. What we're going to do now is connect them. And again, this is going to be very lightly. So I have my 2 dots lined up on my straight edge. I'm going to very lightly draw a line there. I'm going to do this all the way around. Now I've gone ahead and gone over it again so that you can really see my lines. I want you to make sure yours are light, but for the purpose of this video, I'm making mine a little bit darker so that you can actually see what I'm doing. Okay, so from this point on, you need to divide up, well, let me do this. This middle line, you no longer need. So we are going to erase that middle line. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to divide up the space so that you can see where your letters are going. Okay, so on this side, see that's like way too long and skinny. We're going to start out our first one. If you look at this straight edge, it needs to be beyond the width of this straight edge. We're going to come out. I'm going to make it about right here. I think that's okay. I'm trying to stay parallel. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side over here. Okay, so these are going to be 2 letters, and it really depends on how many that you have. What I'm going to do with mine, I think I'm going to do, since I have 7, I have to actually divide them in half. I'm going to do MCG on one side and RANN on the other. So I need to have 3 over here and 4 over here, because this is my dividing line. Okay, so let's see. As you go back, it's like we talked about when we were discussing space in our sketchbooks. These lines are going to get closer together as they go back. They get smaller as they go back. And so you know, this one was the width and a little bit. This one might just be the width. Let's look at that. Let's just see what it looks like. I think that looks okay. So I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, so I only need 3 over here. So that's going to be 1, 2, maybe about like this. See how these lines are getting closer and closer together. And just for you for those of you that have at least 10, what you're going to do is, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is going to be so little and way back in there. So if you have 10, your 5 on this side are going to look kind of like this. Okay. For me, I only need 1, 2, 3. So all of this, I don't need. I'm going to erase those 2 lines. Okay, now I need to get 4 on this side. So this is going to be 3 and 4. Okay. Now, this is where you have to translate what you have done here onto this shape now. It's going to be stretched out a little bit. So it's really important you understand how your block letters work and you have practiced them before you go to your project in this paper. So with this, the vertical lines are not going to change at all. They stay vertical. So I'm going to use my straight edge to make these lines nice. There. And there. Oh, and there. Notice too how this part of my M, look how here it's all consistent, and we practice consistency. How this thickness is the same as this, or at least it's pretty close. Here, notice this side, which is closer to you, is going to be bigger. Remember, we talked about scale, and this is a little bit smaller. So as you come closer to the center, the widths of these letters are going to get bigger and bigger. Okay, so with this, let's see, and then that a little bit bigger. Okay, so look at the difference between my 2 M's. See how much more stretched out this is? So your letters are going to change a little bit. For my C, remember with the C's, these round letters, we just cut these corners off to begin with. So I'm going to do the same thing, just kind of rounding this corner off. And here. Okay, and then these horizontal lines here and here, these horizontal lines here, all of these lines that are horizontal are actually going to point towards our point. So this little bit of the C is actually going to point back towards our 1 point to the left. So notice how I'm lining this point up. This is about where that horizontal part is of my C here. I'm going to keep this side on the point and kind of bring, let me do the bottom so I can see more. Keeping this on the point, I'm going to bring this down and draw this part. So again, notice if there is anything that is horizontal, here, 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 horizontal points towards either one of our 2 points, and verticals stay vertical. Here I'm going to try to make it maybe just a little bit thicker because we're getting closer. So with this one, with the C right next to the M, notice I'm trying to make it a little bit, just barely thicker. But then as I come around to this side, it's getting even a little bit thicker than here. So as I get closer to the center, the width of my letters get bigger and bigger. All right, now for my G. Again here, don't forget, horizontal lines stay horizontal. So this part of my G is lining up to that point. I'm gonna keep this end on the point, come down, draw the bottom part of that. But remember, again though, if it's vertical, it stays vertical. So I'm keeping this edge straight with this middle line. And notice how this line with the C and the G, these line up here. So I'm going to use this as my guide for where to put that part of my G. Okay. Okay, so this was all on the left side. Now we're going to hit to the right side. And these horizontal lines are now going to start pointing over here if I have them. All right. These parts of my R start out horizontal. So I am going to use this point just to start them out before I round it. As you can see with this, stretching those letters out, it gets a little trickier drawing these block letters. And so I just can't tell you enough how important it was to look at those guidelines from that original handout that I put on our Google Classroom, so that when I'm working on this N, because the N was tricky, the most important thing was to make sure that these points were here for me so that I could see where this comes off in the N and where it's supposed to end up. So those guidelines really helped me figure this angle out. So make sure you're using that as you go. All right, so once you have your letters on there, you're happy with them, they look pretty good. What you're gonna do is erase all the lines that you no longer need. So keep the dot right here, but I don't need this. I don't need this. If it's not part of my letter, erase it. So like this part right here, we don't need, so that you just have your letters. So I've erased all of my lines. The only pencil I have on the paper now is what is surrounding and creating each letter. Everything else has been erased, but I do have still my 2 points because we are not done yet. What we need to do is make these look like actual blocks that are going back into space. So, you know, when we were working on these letters, all of these horizontal lines actually pointed over here. Now to make them look like they're going back into space, we're going to flip over and use this dot for the letters on the left side. So let's just focus on these. What I want you to do is notice all of the points on your letters. We're going to line up this side over here with this point, and we're going to go through each one of these and see if we need to draw a line that's going back into space. If we would draw a line that goes through the letter, we're going to leave it alone. If the line goes on the outside of the letter, we're going to draw it. Let me show you how. Starting with this point, there is a line segment that we can draw from here until we touch the letter. That's it. This one we're not going to draw because it goes through the letter. Let's go up, 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 up. Next point here, there is a little segment right here on the outside of the letter that we can draw until we hit the edge of that letter. Make sure you're keeping the other end right here next to this point. Now this angle right here, this point would go through the letter, we don't draw it. This one goes through the letter, we don't draw it. This one would go through the letter, we don't draw it. Same thing here. This is in the middle of the letter. This one, however, is not. So I'm going to draw a line until I hit the other side. This one would go through the letter. This one would not. So we're going to draw just this little bitty line until we hit the next letter. Let's see, is there anything else that I missed? Let's see, this one would go through the letter, we don't draw it, but this one, we can draw just that little bit. So if you look at it, you can now see that it's more of a block. It's got mass, where here's the surface, the front, and then these are the sides that go back into space. All right, now let's look at our C. C's can be a little tricky. The curves can be a little tricky. But what you need to know when you're doing that is that it's just like the M, where you have these points. Of course, we're going to draw that line. We don't need this because it would go through the G. But with these curves, it's like, where do you find the place to draw your line? I'm going to move my straight edge up above it so you can see a little bit better. What you do is, of course, you keep this end at the point, but you bring this down, and right when you start to touch that curve, that's your spot right there. So I'm going to draw a little line segment right there. I'm going to come down. I've got this point here that I can draw. And I don't see anything else until, look, I hit right here, the very edge of that C, right here where it goes back into space. So really, that's it for my C. For my G, you know, this is a perfectly straight line, so there's really nothing to do. Here, that would go through my letter. So there's really nothing in here to even draw. What I can do, though, is come up here and get this point and then go all the way up to the top and get the very edge of that G. Let's see if there's anything else. Not until I hit the very bottom right here. Okay. So I've got my MCG. Now what I'm going to do is work on the right side, and this time I'm going to point over here. I'm going to use this point on the left. So I'm going to start way in the back with my N. And remember, if you're looking at all your points and you're looking at where the curves end, but if it's a point that if you drew a line goes through the letter, you just leave it alone. So I've got one here. That goes through the letter, that goes through the letter. I have one here that I can draw. And that's really it, because the rest of these lines are connected to this other end. We don't ever want to draw a line through the letter that you created. One there. That goes through the letter, that goes through the letter, that goes through. This one we can draw. And this end is a little bit different than that one because here it's not lined up. Like these are right next to each other. I've got a space. So I can actually come back and draw a line from this point that goes back. And I believe that's it for my N. Now for my A. There. There's really nothing I can do there because that's a straight line. That would go through my letter. I can get this one down here. Those are connected. I can't draw anything there. That's it for my A. And then finally for my R. Now, this middle section's always weird because these are really sharing the same space, and that is physically impossible. But we're just going to kind of go with it and work it into our design. So there's one. Of course, that goes through the letter, so we're not going to do that. This would go through the letter. There's really nothing else to do there, but we can finish out the bottom of this R down here that kind of lines up with the G. Oh. Okay. So again, that's a little awkward, but that's okay. We're going to work with it. So now that you have this in 2-point perspective, what we are going to do is color it in with colored pencil. And I want you to use analogous colors like we did before with our geometric project that we just finished. But I want you to start light and go dark. So that can be light in one color and you get darker, or you could go from green into blue because those are analogous, just as long as the top is light and the bottom is dark. You can do each letter a different color. You can do them all the same. That's completely up to you as long as it's light and dark. What I want you to notice while you're doing this, and I'm going to do each letter differently so you can see a variety of ways that you can approach this, but I want you to notice that I'm doing the whole letter. I am using this lighter green to do the entire top of this M, and I'm blending in the analogous blue towards the bottom, going across the entire thing. So for right now, as you're coloring this in, I want you to ignore the fact that there's different to this, different facets. We're just going to use our colored pencils to fill the entire letter in as if it was just one piece. We're going to go back over the top of this with another technique once we've finished this. So I want you to notice that within each letter, even in the spaces that are going back and on the insides, I've colored them so they go from a color into an analogous color, or a light color like pink is technically a tint of red, into a darker version of that color. If you want, you could have done them all the same. I did them all differently so that you could see the different ways that they could look. I've got one that just goes from a light blue to a dark blue, light green to dark green. But in any case, it either goes from an analogous color to another one or a light color into its darker version. But we are not done yet. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use some different pencil techniques to shade the inside. And so what you're going to be doing is one of two things. I'm going to write this on the back just so that you can see. One is called hatching, and that's when you have lines that are close together like this, and it's used in different types of shading. And there's cross hatching. We're going to be doing both of these. Oops, cross. I cannot talk and write at the same time. Cross hatching. Okay, and that's when you go one way, but then you come back and go the opposite way. So they're crossing over each other. So we're going to be using some hatching and cross hatching. So what I want you to do is take the darkest value, the darkest color that you have for each letter. I'm going to start with this one, and I used, let's see, I think I used, is it this blue? No, that's a little bit darker. I used this blue. And I want you to pay attention to the way the lines in your letters go, because we're going to kind of mimic that with these hatching lines. I'm going to start up here. Okay, so I have the darkest color that I used, but I'm going to go up to the top where it's lightest, and I'm going to use that color, and I'm going to do some hatching lines. And notice I'm going in the same direction that this line is. Over here, back here where you can see that little bit, I'm going to go straight up and down, just like the edge of this letter is, doing some hatching lines. And here, notice the edge of this letter. You can do hatching lines this way. And then back in here, some hatching lines going down into that color. Okay, so now once I hit this color that I have in my hand and the color on the bottom of this letter, I need to switch to a darker color. So let's see if this will show up. Yeah, this kind of shows up a little bit here and over here. We're going to leave the actual letter alone. We're just going to leave that alone. And I think down here I could probably get a little bit darker. This time I'm going to go and do some cross hatching down here at the bottom so that really stands out, so that you can see the difference between this side and the face of the letter. Right here, these are kind of blending together to me, so I want a little bit more contrast. So I'm going to come in here and do some cross hatching lines just to kind of make that stand out a little bit more, so that you can see where these sides are now going back into space. Going to do the same thing with all of these. Now with this one, let's see if I've got, all right, this is the darkest color, but notice how there's a curve here. This one, the M was easy because everything is straight. When you get to your C's, G's, parts of your R, or other letters that you might have with a curve, you're gonna need to go with this curve. So if I start up here, notice how I'm coming around. You know, I would come around here like this, but I'm gonna stop there because I don't wanna do anything on the face of my letter. But notice how I'm following that curve around, but then this color is getting lost. So I need something darker. So I actually think I'm going to use a brown. I'm going to come in here, do some hatching lines. And as it goes further and further back away from us, this side, it needs to get darker and darker. So I'm trying to keep that curve. But then if I do my cross hatching, it's going to go across this way. So I'm just trying to really get some contrast in there. So what I want you to notice is how I was using lines, either hatching lines or cross hatching lines, to show contrast between the front of the M and the side of the M. With this one, with the reds, I didn't have a red dark enough down here, so I started adding brown. Over here, I didn't have anything darker than this dark bluish purple color, so I actually used black in here. And as I'm going through and I'm looking at it, you know, I'm looking at what can I do to make things pop out. And so you're looking for contrast between the front of your letter and where it starts to go back. So you can just kind of go back and forth between your different colors to try to, you know, push those sides and make them look like they're going back into space. So we're done with our letters, but we're not done with the project. What I need you to do is fill in all this negative space we have back here. It can be with whatever. You could put a design, you could do a Zentangle, a couple of little things. You could put little cartoon characters in here, but we just have too much negative space. We need to fill it in with something. Here's an example of one that I had done with my Art 1 class last year. And it's a little bit more involved, more words on black paper. But it's the same thing, using 2-point perspective to illustrate some letters. And notice how I just used lines as a design in the background to fill up that negative space, where I used some warm colors here and cool colors to just kind of fill it in. So it can be pure design, it can be little doodles. Get creative. This can be whatever it is that you're into, you can draw to fill in the space. I'll have some examples underneath this video so that you can look at what other students have done. So this is my final piece. I went back and darkened in here a little bit more and in here a little bit more just to get that contrast. I also used the method that we used in our last project, our last colored pencil project, to get the same design on all 4 corners. You don't have to do that, but it's always an option now that you know how to do it. But yeah, get creative. Make sure you have something interesting in your corners to really fill out that space.